Hello, it is Xanet Pailet, and I am here live on Talking Love, Sex, and Intimacy with Xanet, waiting for my guest Celeste Hirschman to arrive. And here she is. Just hang on a second. Hello, Celeste.
Hello, Janae. How are you?
I'm great. Amazingly, we did this. So
Yay.
Yay! So I am so delighted that to have the amazing Celeste Hirschman joining me or joining us for our conversation today. Celeste is the founder, along with Danielle Harrell, of the Somatica Method, which I'm going to have you talk about a little bit at the end. And they are my mentors and teachers and coaches, and Somatica is one of the key modalities that I use in my coaching. And so I'm super excited to have you here today. And last week we had some technical difficulties, but we made it. Yay. So let's talk about consent, right? Because that's such a major topic these days. And I really want to give people some different perspectives around the whole consent conversation. And I guess I just want to ask you, because you have such a good sense of sort of the field around consent right now. My first question for you is, how have things changed? How have you noticed things changing since the metoo movement really started in the fall with the Harvey Weinstein debacle?
Yeah, I mean, I think things are changing a lot around consent. And the biggest thing that I've noticed is just some of my male clients coming in and saying, wow, as I'm listening to all these stories and hear all the women in my life talk about their Me Too stories, I start to think maybe there was a time when I bypassed consent or didn't really, like some anxiety or fear that they had made mistakes by pushing too far, feeling it was their job to try to keep things going or trying to get what they want. And I think some shame and a strong desire to not do those things again. Although I will say that most of the clients that I see already have a lot of fear of crossing women's boundaries and often hold back from even initiating anything. So, they're not usually the ones who are being the big problems out in the world. But yeah, there's definitely some concern, and I do think things are shifting a lot and that we want to have good ways to talk about consent going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I mean, I'm definitely noticing, like, I've had a lot of conversation with men just in my community, and they're just like, I'm holding back. Like, I'm not even going to like dance events because I'm nervous. And then there's also a fear of like, what if some woman outs me, for something that I did that I didn't even know was wrong 10 years ago. And so, yeah, I definitely am also noticing like there's a big shift that's going on. And I think it's holding a lot of people back as well with fear and with shame and feeling like maybe I was one of those people who violated a woman's boundaries, and like, who hasn't violated somebody's boundaries in our lifetime, right? It's hard to imagine that you can be alive and not have violated somebody's boundaries somewhere along your life. I totally agree with that. And I'm curious also, like, do you see this consent piece coming up in long-term relationships as well as, like, I get the single men and women that are dating, like, this is very alive for them. But what about in the context of like a marriage or a long-term relationship? Like, are you noticing that that's actually a piece of what's happening as well, and people are talking about that within that context?
I don't think people are bringing it up, but sometimes we're bringing it up now because I think a lot of non-consensual stuff does happen in relationships, just telling people what you think about them all the time and what they do wrong and all those kinds of things. And, or just, thinking this is my partner, so I'm going to have sex with them, and not really checking in and seeing if it's what they want, and seeing if they're, like people are saying, more of an enthusiastic yes, as opposed to like, I'm just doing this for you and I'm not that into it. Although often in those cases, even the partner starts to feel like, I don't really want somebody to do something with me that they're not that into. So I see that coming up.
Right, right. Yeah, that's interesting too, right? Like there is this way when we're in a long-term relationship that we just like there's an expectation, right, that something's going to happen, and so often we don't check in with ourselves and say like, is this really what I want? You know, I totally get that. So yeah, and it happens all the time. Like happens in our own relationships, right, as well. Like if we're not that conscious of it, we get into those patterns.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to also talk about we're gonna do something really cool for you guys, is we're gonna model a consent conversation. But before we do that, I really wanted to talk about my camera not dropped. I really want to talk about the Aziz Ansari situation that happened. I think it was in December, because there was so much, you know, on social media around that. Not even social media; it was in the New York Times, for God's sakes. It was everywhere, right? It was just like a huge issue, and in large part because, you know, he professed to be a man who was really a feminist, right? And he wrote that book as well, right? So I understand why it happened, but what I really appreciated, you guys wrote a blog post around that, and it was fascinating, and I never thought about it from the perspective, and I read everything about the Aziz Ansari. Fascinated with it, and I want to know, like, what are all the people, what are the feminists thinking, and what are the men thinking, you know, but the piece that you wrote, like it really hit home to me, because what you said, and I want you to talk about it more, was that he and the woman, I don't remember her name was, I don't think we ever knew her name, were on two completely different dates. Yeah. And that was like so interesting. So can you just talk a little bit about what that means and what your perception was of what was happening in that situation?
Yeah, I feel like they were on two completely different dates, and they did not communicate about the fact that they were on two different dates, right? Clearly, it seemed to me that he was very interested in just hooking up and having sex, which I think is a totally valid desire. I do want to say that. And she was interested, it seemed like, in getting to know him, and probably had some sort of fantasy, oh, maybe we're going to date. I'm so excited. I'm telling all my friends, more of a romantic notion of what might happen between the two of them, even imagining maybe a long-term dating situation. And so he was going along just thinking, oh, you know, maybe this girl is my fan and she'll hook up with me. And she's going along thinking, this is Aziz Ansari. Maybe I'm going to be dating somebody famous and exciting, you know? And those, like I said, I think both of those are very valid, but they didn't negotiate whatsoever about the difference. You know, they didn't say, like, he never said, you know, I'm not really looking for anything serious. Do you want to just go home with me tonight? Right? Like that would have been a sentence that would have really alleviated some of this problem, because then she could have decided, is that what I want from this situation or not? Right?
Right.
And she also could have said, hey, if this is just a hookup thing, you know, it's great to get to know you, but I'm not into that, you know. So, and I do think we have you know, that romantic notion of like, we want things to just happen. So she was probably hoping to like have a deep conversation and be kind of swept away. And, you know, I mean, I think those romantic things are wonderful when they work out, but they really suck when they don't, or they can really suck when they don't. And so sometimes I think it's more worth it to have the conversation than just try to stay in the fantasy land about it.
And when do you think they should have had that conversation? Like, at what point in that date do you think that conversation needed to happen? Was it before they had the date, or was it, you know, during dinner? I'm really kind of curious about that. Like, when do you have these types of conversations?
Yeah, I think either of those would work, you know, before they have the date. Like they could be texting about like, hey, I'm not really, if you think this is just a hookup, that's not what I'm into or something. Or if she just wanted to go to dinner with him anyway, she could have sat down, and when she sat down, they could have talked about it. You know? So I don't think it matters that much. It probably before they go home and start making out.
Yeah, right. Probably true.
Right.
So what holds people back from being able to have these conversations? Because they're kind of hard conversations to have, right? Like, especially somebody you really don't know that well. Like, what is the fear, or what's the holdback?
Well, I think men have a big scarcity fear. They're afraid if they say that they just want sex from someone that they're not going to get it. And it's a realistic fear, because a lot of women don't want to just have sex with men. Some do. So, I've told men you kind of have to choose. You have to decide, like, do I want to take the risk of telling somebody that that's just what I want and then not have a bunch of women angry at me afterwards? Or am I going to go into this and sort of like act like I may be interested in being their boyfriend and have a lot of women slamming me and, telling everybody how horrible I am, writing Facebook posts about me. So, and I think it's more think
So
how to.
there you go. You got a little further.
Yeah. Sorry. So I think men really need to think about like whether they want to do that or not. And I think women, we do have this romantic fantasy. So a big fear is like, if I start talking really more practically or in depth, firstly, I might scare a guy away, and secondly, it's not going to be like the sweeping off my feet feeling that I was hoping for. I think it still can be, but I think that there's a fear there. And then people just don't talk about this stuff. We don't have a language for it, So that's a big piece also.
I mean, it's a huge issue that we don't have a language for it. Like, not only do we never get taught about sex, but we never get taught about how to have like a conversation around whether or not you actually want to have sex or what you like having during sex, right? And all of that predates like even having a consent conversation, right? The consent conversation is the most important piece of it. So we're going to model a consent conversation, but I just want you to say like, what do you think are the elements of a really good consent conversation? What would you say those elements are?
Well, firstly, I think, I rail against any kind of one-size-fits-all approach. So I do feel like what you're trying to find out in a consent conversation is what kind of consent the person that you're with wants to work with, right? So is it this affirmative consent where you're asking step by step, can I do this? Can I do this? Can I do this? Or is it more of like an agreement, like I want you to try something, and then I'll tell you if I need something to be different, right? I don't want you to ask me step by step by step, because for some people, to be asked step by step would be the most caring thing in the world, and they would feel so safe and happy. And for other people, it would be like, that kind of turns me off that you're asking for everything. Like, it takes me out of the flow, and I really want to, I'll take care of myself in this situation, and I really want it to just escalate more, without the verbal requests.
Yeah. I'm definitely one of those, like, it's interesting. Like, I don't like being constantly asked.
Yep.
But I definitely want to have a consent conversation so we can talk about, what works for me. So let's model this consent conversation with you and me. You're going to be asking me about consent. We'll see what happens. We've never done this before.
So can we be on a date? Can I be on a date with your beautiful self?
You can totally be on a date, and I can be on a date with you, and it's going to be all fun, wonderful, totally. Yes, we're on a date.
All right, Xanet. Well, I want to say that I'm really enjoying being on this date with you.
Thank you. I'm having a wonderful time as well. I feel very connected.
And I love your smile and your laugh. It's infectious. And I just want to I've noticed that I'm starting to want to kiss you. And before I venture into that territory, I just want to say that for me, it's really important that anything that happens between us, that it's something that you really want.
Yeah.
You want that too?
I am so appreciative of you saying that and bringing that up. And I actually feel that energy, and I want to kiss you too. So I'm a definite yes.
Oh. Yay. Oh, now I'm sad that we're on screen.
We've got a green light right now.
Okay. I guess what I really want to know is, once I start kissing those beautiful lips, if I want to take it to the next thing, if I want to start touching your body or eventually taking some of your clothes off, do you want me to ask you as I escalate through that? Or would you rather that me just go ahead and try things and you tell me if you want me to stop or slow down, or you want something different than what I'm doing?
Yeah. So I feel like for me, like my body talks a lot during romantic situations. Like, like you can see I'm already like moving, right? And so, so my desire would be, my request would be like, yeah, just like I'll check in and sort of see how my body is moving. And if you're not sure of something, you can stop, and ask me. I definitely do have some boundaries. Like I know that already. Like I'm not feeling at the moment, it could change, but I'm not feeling like I want to have intercourse tonight. Like that's just something for me. I would like to hold off on that and see how tonight, or this first date goes, or whatever the second date goes. But yeah, so my request would be, to go slow, and to watch what's going on with my body. I think my yeses are very like, I make a little sound and I move my body, and you'll feel my energy, and there could also be a no.
Okay. Well, I love how you're moving your body. It's really beautiful. And I only hope to be able to follow your lead in that way, your sounds and your movements. But I just want to ask you for sure to tell me if there's anything that doesn't feel good. I just want to be able to trust that you'll do that so that I can continue on.
Yeah, no, definitely. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I'm a pretty good communicator. And so if something doesn't feel good, I might, suggest you do something else. But I think I also want to tell you that, well, I feel like I'm really present and grounded right now. Like, because I don't know if we'll have this conversation again. Probably we will have it again if we continue seeing each other. But when we get into maybe a more of a deeper sexual place, which may or may not happen tonight, sometimes my body freezes, or I just kind of shut down, particularly if I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable or unsafe. And that's just a pattern of mine. And so like, if you notice that, I would really appreciate you like stopping and just saying like, whoa, Xanet, are you here? What's going on? Can you communicate with me? Because, I can't really track that as somebody who, sometimes freezes or even dissociates a little bit. Like, it's really hard for me to track that. It doesn't happen that often, but it tends to happen when I'm in a new situation with a new partner who I don't really know and don't feel like that safe with. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, and it scares me a little bit.
Yeah. What part of it scares you?
Well, it scares me because if I don't notice it properly, then I might go over your boundaries, and I'm wondering if that does happen, what we would do.
I'm not going to be blaming or shaming here. Like if you end up crossing a boundary, I will figure it out, and I will say, oh, wow, okay, you ended up crossing a boundary and I left my body for a little bit. So that made the situation a little more complicated. But that's part of the reality of dating Xanet.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and I think I can give you some hints along the way, which is like, go slow and, suggest, because I like to keep my eyes closed a lot as I'm feeling into my sensation. Like, every once in a while, just like say, Xanet, like, look at me, open your eyes, like, let's kiss, right? So like really being very I think slowing down for me helps me, because when things are slow, then my nervous system has time to regulate as I'm getting more aroused, as opposed to when things zip up and then I just go into like, whoa, right?
Well, that helps me a lot to have some, specific ideas of what I can do to kind of know that you're still present. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having that. Thanks for asking those great questions. Thanks for having that conversation.
Good. Now I'm just going to bite your neck, and then I'm not going to ask.
So I'm curious, would it be appropriate for me then to you just asked me about my consent, but consent goes both ways. Would you then suggest that I ask you about your own boundaries, and like what does consent look like for you as well? I mean, how does what normally happens? What do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, I think it could go both ways. I think often, you know, especially if it's a male-female dynamic, the man will probably not realize that he has boundaries until one is actually hit. So, you know, you could ask, and, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's one scenario, right? That was kind of one scenario. But what if there was another scenario where I was actually somebody who loved, which is actually true in my case, I really like to be submissive, and not having consent can be really hot for me at some level. You know what I'm talking about?
Right.
More in a like BDSM sort of kinky kind of place. How then do you navigate that conversation?
Well, I think BDSM has had the, you know, the corner on the consent conversation market for a long time, right? They always, I mean, not that they don't always do it, that's not true, but when they do it right, which is to say, like, I want to play with the non-consent and playing with the edges of boundaries for you, and then they establish a safe word. So if it goes too far, then, you know, because I definitely like to play with those edges also. So I would need to have a safe word and practice that safe word with you to make sure you can say no, or say red, or say, yeah, watermelon, that's fine.
Right. But what about this? Like, so you're talking about like setting up a scene, and I totally get that. We definitely have to agreements. But what if like I'm just a woman who likes to be taken, right? Like sometimes I just want, you know, a partner to like walk in the door and, you know, pick me up and throw me on the bed and, you know, have sex with me, right? So where does consent come in that place?
Well, I think if you have this initial consent conversation, you don't have to have that every time you see each other. So from now on, I will take you unless you tell me that you want me to do something different, right? Because you told me already that's kind of who you are and what you want. But it is the complexity of our desire, is that sometimes these conversations can be a turnoff to people because they kind of want to be, you know, some people's turn on is about being forced to do things that they seemingly don't want to do, right? So it's a complexity that I think society is not very good at handling. And I think a lot of the men who are getting, you know, these huge like outcries against them probably have non-consent as part of their fantasy structure. For some of them, they obviously and definitely do. For others, probably. But we don't have a way to have a good conversation around that in our society yet. And I think for real repair and a real understanding, and for us to actually change the tide of what's been going on for so long, we have to have more realistic conversations about that.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And that's so amazing. Like that's the work that you're doing, this work that I'm doing, this work that all the somatica people are doing, trying to help people learn that it's okay to normalize, right? Like we need to normalize, you know, conversation. So I just saw a video on Facebook or something on Facebook where it was a great video. They were showing how, I don't know if you've seen this in Norway. Did you see this? How they start teaching about sex education not in preschool, in elementary school. Like they actually start teaching kids sex education in elementary school, and then all the way through high school. And of course they have one of the lowest teen pregnancy rates and the lowest STD rates and whatever. And they talk about consent, etc. And it's just like, why the hell aren't we doing this? I mean, we know why we're not, but you know, this should be a part and parcel of everybody's education, right? So you shouldn't be graduated as a human if you can't do this.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, will you talk a little bit about Somatica and what's kind of coming up? I mean, it's an amazing program, and I'd love for you to talk about it, because I know we have a new one starting, and you've got an intro,
and you're going to be a group leader. I'm so excited.
Group leader.
Yay. Yeah, so we have another intro coming up, and you can sign up for it on the website, somatica.com. I should have looked at the date beforehand. Did you see the date?
April 8th in San Francisco, and then did the LA one already happen?
Yeah, I just did the LA one this last weekend, and also Wednesday morning we have an online Zoom intro at about noon or 12:30. So you can also sign up for that if you're if you're not nearby. And the training is a 6-month intensive, 4 5-day modules where you go really deeply into understanding the nuts and bolts of sex and relationship and how to have the most fulfilling, hot, sexy sex and how to have the most intimate, connected relationships possible. And it's for people who want to do it for personal growth. And it's also people who want to have a career as a sex and relationship coach. So learning how to do the Somatica method and become a coach in the method, which is Somatica is an experiential, hands-on, but clothes on, so totally legal method of sex and relationship coaching where people can really learn experientially how to be amazing lovers and also how to be emotionally connected.
Yeah, it's just an amazing program. I've taken it twice. And yeah, it's totally changed my life. It's changed my relationships. It's changed the way I work with clients. And, you know, even if you don't want to be I would say a lot of people in my class, the last class I took, were really there for their own personal development and growth. And it really has incredible breadth and depth of information and experiences that will change you. So awesome. Celeste, thank you so much for being on this Facebook Live with me. I so appreciate it. It was just a delight. It was fun having this conversation. I'm looking forward to our date.
Me too. My pleasure. It was really fun. Thank you for having me.
All right. Thanks. Okay. Thanks. Bye, everybody. Bye. I will see you again.
Okay.